Chelsea, I found an amazing article in the Sydney Morning Herald. It says here that the Northern Territory government have directed schools to teach English for 4 hours every day in communities where English is not a first language. Critics believe, and I quote, "This will lead to assimilation in remote communities." And economist Helen Hughes says, and I quote again, "It is absolute nonsense they don't have enough time to spend on their own language. Aborigines, like other Australians, have to speak fluent English, and the way to do that is to start very early." Their own language? English isn't the Aboriginal language. I know the Yukala School in Arnhem Land teaches the Aborigines language ahead of English, and they are very opposed to this new policy. It says here that they fear it will undermine Aboriginal language teaching. A defender of this policy, Professor Peter Buxton, says here, "There is a national trend around the world to retain Indigenous languages. This is a real step backwards." It says here that it concludes saying, "We have to instill in our Aboriginal children a sense of place. These communities are some of the strongest in terms of having their language intact. Western schooling knocks that out of Aboriginal children." He is right. Aborigines need a sense of place. A place is where you feel at home and belong. Place and home are important aspects of a person's identity. So how would you explain the connections between this event and the idea of difference after reading this article with me? This article really does touch on the notion of difference. Aborigines are different because they speak their native languages more fluently than they speak English. This is because their native languages represent a part of their culture. It is as if the Australian government won't allow for this difference. This is one connection. Do you also notice that because the Aborigines are different, they're being forced to become like every other Australian? Their difference should be utilised and encouraged. So your second point here is that the government is trying to integrate them into society and assimilate them or try to shed them of the characteristics that they find undesirable? Exactly. The Aborigines are being compared to a typical white Australian. They differ from the central point of what it means to be Australian. What's happening to diversity these days? I also think this difference is being seen as a deficit. That these native children are lacking Australianness. It is as though being different is unacceptable. The government recognises this difference and is socially trying to remove it by assimilating these Indigenous people into society. So how do you think this can be connected to collective identities? I think these children are being wiped clean of their identity and are being pushed to take on the typical Australian identity instead. In fact, this event relates similarly to the concept of diaspora identities. Retaining collective memories and myths about the homeland and feeling alienated from society are common characteristics of diasporic communities. That is true. The article said that the Indigenous parents want children to have a better chance at getting jobs, and that the only way this can happen is if the children learn to speak English fluently. These are only a few of the characteristics that are relevant to this article. Yes, I see the connection here. This event has only made Aboriginals feel more isolated. Nationally and culturally, we aren't really accepting the Aboriginals. We are trying to change them, as this article from September this year clearly shows. So how do you think we can use this article in teaching a Year 8 and 9 Socials class? Well, to begin, we should have the class read the article and take notes on what they believe are important. What points from this article do you feel are important? Well, I feel this article has many concepts that we can define in class. I feel we should define difference, diversity, integration, assimilation, and deficit. I think these points should be discussed throughout the lesson. So how do you suggest we teach these topics? Well, first of all, I think we should split the class up in groups and then maybe ask them in their own words to come up with what they think those terms actually mean. Come up with their own definitions. Then each group could share their ideas with the class. Maybe from there we could teach them the true definition of the term. So after the class becomes familiar with the terms, what do you reckon we should do next? I think then we should ask the students to read through the article again and then find some examples of these terms being demonstrated. For example, the students could be asked to find an example of a point of difference. from the article and explain why this point demonstrates this difference. This way, they will not only learn what the term theoretically means, but learn what it means in everyday life. And on a personal level, we could ask students if they have ever personally felt different, assimilated, integrated, etc. in their life. By encouraging students to express their feelings of when they felt different, etc., we can help them see why it is bad to make other people feel different in negative ways. This could then help them build an appreciation of difference, and that way they wouldn't see difference as a deficit. So to assist learners to deepen their understanding of difference and community identities, we can then show them examples from the article. For example, I like the part where it said, "It's absolute nonsense the Aboriginals don't have enough time to spend on their own language. Aborigines, like other Australians, have to speak fluent English." I think this would be a good point to bring out, and we could encourage the class to debate whether they feel all Australians must know fluent English and whether individuals can only be Australian if they know English. But we must be careful so that we make this a positive experience for our students. Another point I found interesting and important is this quote about Indigenous schools you told me about. Something about how they fear 4 hours of English will undermine Aboriginal language education, and that this will lead to assimilation in remote communities. I think it was that one. We should ask children if they feel this would actually happen, why it would happen, and if it's a good thing to happen. Good thoughts. I think it's very important that students understand what difference is. I think we could bring to mind then identity locations regarding self. To concrete their understandings of difference, we could encourage them to think of some examples where there are 2 points of difference. For example, white, black, tall, short, literate, illiterate. We should let the children be creative here. Perhaps create axes and groups. Then we should tell them to mark where they feel they are on the axis. Then after they see how different they are on all the scales, they will actually understand that different isn't bad, but is simply different. This should hopefully give them an understanding of the difference between the definition of different and deficit. So within our classroom, how do you feel we can work to overcome the disadvantage and marginalisation of some groups in our community? I think by doing these activities, students will be able to overcome the concept that difference is bad. If they grasp this, they will hopefully not marginalise groups within the community and won't see certain people or races as disadvantaged. If we can help students see that difference depends on the point of view and that everyone is considered different by someone else, they may realise that there is nothing wrong with being different. This would in turn reduce discrimination. So how do you feel we can teach our Year 8 and 9s more about collective identity? I think we can use the same approaches we did before by getting the class to define the term collective identity. After they contemplate on the meaning and we provide them with the true definition, we can ask them what their cultural group or identity is and then encourage the class to share their thoughts. Then we should introduce the term diaspora and the features of these types of communities. Then we can ask the class in what way they feel that Aborigines are diasporic. Excellent. This way we are immersing them in the Aboriginal culture. Then we can ask the class what group they feel their cultural identity is. For example, I might present to the class my diasporic identity, that I feel I must return back to Greece, which is my homeland, and how I feel sometimes that I don't belong only here in Australia. After the class has an idea of what I mean, we could ask them if they feel the same way or if they think there is a place they feel connects closely with their identity. Then they should explain how it fits in with their identity.